Welcome to Secondary Traumatic Stress and Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Educator Wellbeing. It is February 25th, 2021. We get to be learning with Steve Hayden, Candice Valenzuela, Katrina Traylor-Rice, Alan Greene, and led by our colleague Oriana Iles at the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. We're happy to have you. Okay, we are sponsored by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. So we want to name that all opinions and feelings and views expressed in this session are of the presenters and teachers, faculty only. And so we want to make sure that that feels disclaimed and that we know who we're listening to. And we appreciate SAMHSA for being part, having the funding to do this work. Great, welcome. Okay. All right, so this is the moment. If you have been a part of this series before, you know that land acknowledgements are something that we are not only doing as an activity, but doing as a purposing. So I am going to read the text, and I'm also going to invite you, as we have done before, and this might be new to some of you, in the chat box to also name what land, what Native peoples, what land you are either coming from or occupying in your area. So as I read that out loud, I'm going to invite you to kind of feel what is coming up for you and also offer your own acknowledgement in the chat box. So because this webinar is co-produced by the Region 10 MHTTC, that's housed at the University of Washington Smart Center. And they acknowledge that the Northwest MHTTC learns, lives, and works on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people who walked here before us and those who still walk here. And we're grateful to respectfully live and work as guests on these lands with the Coast Salish and Native people who call this home. We, at the Pacific Southwest MHTTC, we're led by the Center for Applied Research Solutions, and we have offices across California, both in Sacramento, the land of the Nisenan people, in Santa Rosa, the land of the eight Cahuilla bands, and in Los Angeles, the land of the Tongva people. And then we acknowledge that the belonging of this land is of the indigenous peoples and all the unrecognized tribes and disenfranchised tribes and invisible tribes and peoples as well. I am incredibly grateful in the chat box right now to be seeing the wealth of acknowledgement and deep knowledge and wisdom that all of you are bringing in of what lands you're either coming from or lands you are occupying. I'm actually going to take a moment of just quiet for us to scroll up and down to see all of the wisdom in the room and all the acknowledgement in the room. So part of this work, and I just want to be explicit so that we all are in our learning together, is that we, as the MHTTCs that are funded by the federal government, that are also occupying Native lands, that we're still sitting in learning about how to both acknowledge in a way that's not extractive, but in a way that's purposed. So I really offer you, if you have feedback for us, both in the evaluation or at the end of like how this felt or how it could feel, we really, really welcome that and want to learn from you and with you. Okay. All right, thank you, Kelsey. Yes, so Kelsey just put in the chat box. Kelsey is my colleague, role-alike, and co-conspirator up in the Pacific Southwest, in the Northwest region, Region 10, and Kelsey just dropped the link that you can learn about the land that you come from and occupy and live with and do the work, the radical school mental health championship work that you do. All right. So speaking of land, a quick orientation, if you're very new to us, that we, the Northwest and Pacific Southwest, are two mental health TA centers funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration to support the school mental health workforces. So all of y'all who do school counseling, school psych, district leadership, county leadership, in my humble opinion, we're all school mental health champions because we all are dedicated to schools and mental health, but professional school mental health workforce. And the Northwest MHTTC supports Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, Region 10. And us at the Pacific Southwest, Oriana and I work for the Pacific Southwest MHTTC, and we support the Pacific Islands, California, Hawaii, Arizona, and Nevada. We know that you are coming from across the country, so you can do absolutely no wrong by going to any of our cousin MHTTC's programs. We are a wraparound, open door, full network of care. So please learn, please check out each other's work and know that you are supported. And it's series like this that we get to collaborate with each other so that we get to be in learning and cross-learning with one another. Okay. So our MHTTC whole network is committed to the following values. And we just want to take a moment because these are actually the values: the recovery-oriented language, the renewal-oriented language, the renewal-oriented language that we hope also holds the conversation that we're all here for. So I'm going to ask you in the chat box, if you see one value, strength-based, respectful, consistent, that you would like to hold yourself accountable for this session while you listen in. So it's actually a self-accountability. So I could say, Leora, I am going to hold myself right now to being strength-based in this conversation as we listen to, especially as a white person, listening into learning about secondary traumatic stress, that I am going to commit to hearing this conversation from a strength-based conversation. Okay, great. So some of our colleagues are committing to free of labels. Yep. Some of our colleagues are committed to being hopeful and trauma responsive and being mindful. Oriana, what out of this set of language, what are you going to hold yourself accountable to?
I love the way these are all framed, but inviting individuals to participate in their own journeys. I think that's a really powerful one. I want to commit to myself. I need reminding how often.
Beautiful, thank you. And it's that one that actually is, that was not a plug, like I literally did not know that Oriana was going to name that for yourself. But that is one that definitely, especially for this conversation today, some of us are coming in wanting to be in solidarity. Some of us are coming into this conversation wanting to get affirmation. Some of us are coming into this conversation out of curiosity. We're all on our own journey. And I just want to be really clear that everyone's truth is their truth. And so part of this listening in is for us to both listen to others, but also listen to what comes up for ourselves. Thank you, everyone who in the chat box is being open, holding yourselves accountable in a public way. I think I've said this before, but this work just makes me so happy because it means we are learning in public. So a very quick review. This session is part of a longer series on the Interconnected Systems Framework. We have one of the authors on with us in the chat box. I saw you, Susan Barrett. So thank you for all of you for being here, and just to know that if you're interested to hear more about the Interconnected Systems Framework, this idea that just doing school mental health at your school site is not enough, because our young people get mental health support outside of school and in many different ways. And part of our work as school mental health champions is understanding that we don't serve schools, we serve humans. So how do we see the whole lives that humans live? And there are 3 recorded webinars that can get you started, and also some fact sheets. We love the fact sheets. Okay, so this might be super busy, but all that I want to tell you is that this session today, Oriana always tells me my PowerPoints are too busy. Okay, we want to tell you that this session is part of Module 4, Interconnected Systems Framework and Equity. So we're doing a little bit of a rewind. We heard from Kurt and Susan on the 19th, and we heard from Farzana on the 21st. And then we had a town hall. So if you're interested in those 2 webinars as well, they're recorded, and Livia just dropped where you can find them. So we're going a little bit of a back in time, but we all know there is always the right time for the right conversation. So this is it. This is it. Okay, great. Last but not least, before we get into the good stuff. Okay, so this whole interconnected systems framework, the principles of why we're here. All of you are here as either district coaches, you're involved in multi-tier systems of support, you may be involved in RTI, maybe you're a coach, maybe you're a learner. This framework holds that equity is at the center of everything that we do. Part of the word of equity, the way that we use that definition, is being attuned and honest and aware of how people have been disenfranchised and harmed in the past that has led up to this moment of disparity, and what we need to do to both repair and reconcile. So we actually can't do equity work if we aren't clear about where the harm lives, who is benefiting, and why we're still engaged in it. So part of this, again, as we move forward in this conversation today, the invitation is to think about how do you put equity at the center of everything you do and who you are as a school mental health champion. Okay, I'm going to hand it to Oriana to give us some breath to help us do a little bit of thinking and feeling at the same time so that we can hear and we can listen in.
All right. So my name is Oriana Ides, and I'm incredibly grateful to be here with you all. I think this is such a powerful gesture that you showed up, regardless of who you are or what brought you here. Claiming our wellness is such a radical act. Standing in solidarity for the greater good and collective wellness is also such a radical act. So thank you so much. In the light of radical acts, I wanted to offer a settling in today that is called metta. It is a Buddhist practice that centers joy and wellness over production. It also centers community and collective wellness over the individual, which is just incredibly beautiful to me. So join however feels comfortable for you. You can close your eyes if you'd like. You can gaze down if you'd like. Really, there's no wrong way to be present for the next few moments. You can listen to my voice. You can tune me out. You can visualize along with me. So the choice is yours. I'd like to invite you to take a deep cleansing breath at your own pace. And with that breath, bring awareness to yourself. Make any effort you can to settle your breath, settle your body, relax your jaw, relax your shoulders. Notice your feet and calves. Allow ease to wash over them. Find tranquility wherever you can in this moment. Notice your belly. Feel your breath warm your belly with every inhale. Bring your awareness to your heart center. Recite to yourself, if you'd like, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be safe, may I be peaceful and at ease. With your next breath, I invite you to bring to mind a deeply respected comrade or a beloved student. Bring that person to mind as vividly as you can and think of their good qualities. Feel your connection with them and your liking for them. Imagine a shining light from their heart to yours. Recite to yourself, may they be happy, may they be well, may they be safe, may they be peaceful and at ease. With your next breath, allow a member of your school community to come to mind. Someone who feels difficult to love, hard to hold. This can be either an immediate or district office member. Make effort to see their humanity, their good. Anger and grief or sadness may arise. Don't judge these feelings or allow them to settle. Note them as signs that your heart is softening, revealing what is held there. With whatever patience, acceptance, and kindness you can muster for such feelings, direct kindness towards them. Recite to yourself, may they be happy, may they be well, May they be safe. May they be peaceful and at ease. With our final collective breaths together, think of all three people: yourself, a deeply respected comrade or beloved student, and a hard-to-love person within your school community. Now extend your feelings of love and kindness further to everyone around you, to everyone in your school community, your school district, your town, your country, and so on throughout the world. Allow waves of loving kindness to wash over them. Recite to yourself, may we be happy. May we be well. May we be safe. May we be peaceful and at ease. I invite you to open your eyes if you close them, or raise your gaze if you lowered. I invite you also to ask yourself how that felt in your body, and we'd love to hear it in the chat. How did that feel in your heart? We're all moving so quickly. Today's theme is deeply centered in wellness, and thought it's important for us to, we have a lot of content to cover today, some really rich experience and wisdom, but there's nothing more wise than your intuitive knowing. And so I wanted to create a little space for you to connect with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Oriana. Thank you. Okay. So in that space, we're going to do a little bit of rewinding and reminding. Seeing lots of resonance in the chat box. Reminding and rewinding about why we're using the term secondary traumatic stress, why we're using the term BIPOC, and how this might impact educators that identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color uniquely. So Oriana and I are going to go through a little bit more of grounding, and then we're going to bring in Steve Hayden, who's going to, you might remember from our session in October, who's going to offer us some learning around secondary traumatic stress, and then we'll bring on our other teachers to learn from. Okay. So Oriana and I are going to take a moment to talk about why we termed this session BIPOC. Why are we terming this session BIPOC? The term is relatively new. The purpose is not. The term is relatively new, but the purpose is not. So we are honoring, it's actually an organization called the BIPOC Project, that it really names that the use of the term Black, Indigenous, and people of color is to explicitly center and call in the experience of Black folks in this country and Indigenous folks in this country, that sometimes when using the term people of color get erased or washed out. And because of the unique experiences of both of those, I'm using the word community and populations, but we all know it's not a one term, one fits all. But the unique experiences of folks who identify as Black and folks who identify as Indigenous, and both needs to be explicitly named and centered for us to do the anti-racism work, the equity work, and be really clear about the anti-Black and anti-Indigenous work that sometimes and often thrives in our school communities. So I'm going to offer one other thing. I'm going to turn to Oriana to offer a little bit more, and then we'll move forward. So the piece about that I have learned as someone who consistently and both in my intent and impact wants to be in solidarity as a white person, that I want to be really clear that we're not using the word BIPOC or the term BIPOC to flatten the experience all in one. It's everyone who's not white has one experience and everyone who is white has the other experience. That's not what we're actually trying to do. What we're really trying to do is lift up and be explicit about both the specific needs and specific joys and specific wisdoms of folks who identify as Black and Indigenous and folks of color. So I want to also offer this, that I have been called in my allyship just from folks who actually do not identify with the term BIPOC. They know I'd like to be, I am Black, I'm Indigenous. It is not my job as someone who is white to say, no, the term we're using right now is BIPOC. It's my job actually to say, yeah, because if we are about being person first and person centered, then really what's most important is to ask someone, what is the way in which, what is the language that brings you a sense of being seen, of being witnessed, and being humanized? So we're using this term BIPOC in this session, with the intention of lifting up solidarity and not in the intention of flattening. And I wanted to pass it to Oriana to see if you have any other comments you wanted to offer.
Well, to build off of what you're sharing, I think it's important that as school communities, we allow educators to identify in the ways that feel comfortable to them, and that we don't assume or erase identity in the process of trying to be inclusive, which can often happen. And so the term BIPOC in my experience really honors the unique experience of people and allows us to be responsive to that unique experience, to learn and understand. And it also acknowledges that there is a collective struggle and a common struggle. So it does both, which I think is really powerful and important.
Thank you.
The other thing I want to say to that is, we are very becoming better at identifying the needs of BIPOC youth, bringing their experience and their wellness into the conversation and in school spaces, but we have not gotten good enough at that yet. And we definitely have a lot of work to do in regards to elevating the needs, experiences, and wellness of BIPOC educators. And so this is an effort to do that. And you'll see with our panelists today, the wellness of Black, Indigenous, and youth of color is deeply and intrinsically dependent on the wellness of their BIPOC educators. And so these two things go hand in hand. And we want to also call to light that our racial identity is incredibly important in why we do the work we do and how we show up in the work every day, every moment, how we hold it, what it means to us, how we take it home. And in addition to our racial identity, also our class, our language, our culture, all these other elements of our identity also play a role in how we hold the work that we do. And so for BIPOC educators, often we are holding the depth and trauma of our young folks in a unique way, which we'll talk about today, whilst also truncating parts of ourself to exist within the dominant culture. And Du Bois and Fanon will say that that is violence, and that deeply impacts our well-being, our biopsychosocial well-being. So today we hope to unpack some of that as well.
Thanks. Thank you, Ariana. Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to go off video. Steve Hayden's going to come on, and then we'll get to listen to our teachers.
Well, thank you for this introduction and for this opening. Greatly appreciate it. And so, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about secondary traumatic stress, why you might be at risk for it, what are some things to look for, and then how it impacts us across multiple life domains, and then talk a little bit about collective care. If you were in the presentation we did back in the fall, some of this will be familiar to you, so I invite you to stay, or at the beginning, Oriana talked about journaling or going for a walk or listening that way, and feel free to do that. But secondary traumatic stress sort of is a condition where, when we work so intimately and closely with individuals that have experienced some type of devastating hardship or trauma or loss, that we actually start to pick up on some of what they're experiencing because we care and really want to help the individual that we're working with. And so that can be things like, and I'm going to get into some of those impacts, but avoidance, isolation, sleep disturbances, sort of having difficulty with becoming relationships at work and at home. It's important to understand that secondary trauma can impact anyone, anywhere. There's no age limit to it. It can sort of just set in as you're doing some of the work, or as you're thinking about some of the work you're doing with the individuals in your settings, and particularly in helping professions. The column on the right are a list of sort of signs to look for if you're beginning to start or actually risk factors if you're for why you might have this condition of secondary traumatic stress. The first one is countertransference, right? And so I'm a social worker by trade, and so one of the first things we learn about is how we can sometimes experience countertransference, and what that is sort of, you see yourself in the work that you're doing with others, that the person that you're working with reminds you of someone or something in your life that perhaps has gone unresolved, or something that you kind of resonate with. And so you have these experiences of countertransference. For BIPOC educators, this is really important, because we might be working with BIPOC youth who have experienced some type of racial trauma or injustice or hardship, and we ourselves might have experienced the same thing. And so we can almost get in touch with and relate to what the individual is experiencing. Personal experiences with trauma events, and perhaps that is some of your own unresolved trauma that quite hasn't been dealt with or fully healed through, is a risk factor. Direct contact with children's stories. There's such a vulnerable, marginalized population, and so even more so do we want to reach out and ensure that they're safe and taken care of and protected. Helping others and neglecting yourself, that there's so much need out there that you forget to take care of yourself, because you have to spend so much time working with and helping the individuals that you're working with. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. And then the bottom one there is empathy versus sympathy. Again, social worker by trade. So one of the first things we were taught was to be empathetic and almost have anticipatory empathy, and anticipate that we're going to have some empathetic compassion with the individual that we're working with, versus sympathy, which is kind of feeling sorrow for someone. It's perfectly okay to be empathetic, but coupled with some of these other risk factors, again, could bring about the condition of secondary traumatic stress. Can we go to the next slide? So here are some signs to look for if you think you might be experiencing secondary trauma. The first one is sort of this intense connection to those you help, that you not only care about the person you're working with, but you're overly invested in making sure that that individual is doing okay, that this person can't make it without you. And for me, I think it's okay to stay connected to the process, but not overly attached to the process. Right? Irritability. That, things you could go with the flow, and things were, don't sweat the small stuff. Now you're highly irritable, and the little things just sort of bother you that they didn't used to in the past. Being too hard on yourself, again, that there's so much need out there that you can't afford to take time away from yourself, and that you're the only one that can get it done. And sometimes you might be, but other times we need others to rely on. We need a team, a support system to solve a problem or to deal with a crisis or an issue in some of our spaces. Self-esteem, you might experience low feelings of self-esteem or inadequacy. Conversely, you might experience feelings of grandiosity. And so these, again, some of the signs to look for if you're experiencing secondary trauma. And this lack of focus, right? Inability to concentrate. And then the PTSD reactions, there's some similarities there, such as just sleep disturbances, intrusive thoughts. Some of the ways that we think about PTSD, if you have some familiar knowledge and content, it very similar with secondary traumatic stress. So this slide has a whole list of impacts across these different life domains. And before I jump into those, I invite you to just sit for a moment and reflect on sort of what is secondary trauma. When I do a lot of this work, oftentimes folks they're familiar with it, they just didn't know what it was called. And so when we attach vocabulary and language to something, it becomes more familiar and we feel more comfortable thinking about it, sharing about it, and recognizing that. And that's a good thing, right? Like, we want to know why we're impacted a certain way, how we're directly, professionally, personally impacted by something, so that we can do something about it. So I'm just going to take a minute for you to just find some space to sort of think about secondary trauma, the definition I walked you through, why you might be at risk, and what are some of the signs to look for. And feel free to add some things in the chat box and share with our colleagues today. Okay. So as you're thinking about that, right, and as you're sort of considering how I'm describing secondary trauma, and and what are some things to look for, and if you might be kind of at risk for this condition. Let's explore some of these impacts across these multiple life domains. Yeah, burnout. So Adrian put out there the burnout, and the burnout is kind of when that cynicism sets in and that sort of exhaustion sets in, and we just feel like we're just so overwhelmed. And so we want to prevent ourselves from burning out, and really acknowledging that secondary trauma is something that can happen, but there are some things we can do about it. And part of that is recognizing what to do. And where it comes from. So the emotional impact of secondary trauma. So I was at a presentation years and years ago, and someone once said that there's basically 4 human emotions: mad, sad, glad, and scared, right? And I know we have, if those of you working in schools, you have those little emoticons, and they all have these different images. But I thought it was interesting to kind of boil it down to those 4 emotions. And secondary trauma can enhance those emotions with feelings of being overwhelmed, powerless, hypersensitive, or maybe even hopeless. I'm going to repeat those feelings of being overwhelmed, powerless, hypersensitive, or maybe even hopeless. Those are some really powerful emotions that we can experience. Okay. The physical condition of the impact of secondary trauma, again, as you see here, low energy, feeling fatigued, upset stomach, nausea, perhaps even some breathing difficulties. Difficulty sleeping, perhaps feeling dizzy. Those are some of the physical impacts of secondary traumatic stress. The behavioral impact: changing your routine of things, experiencing appetite changes, your mood towards others changes. More severe impacts can be the use of self-destructive coping mechanisms like drugs or substance abuse, excessive gambling, excessive shopping. And these are some of the behavioral impacts of secondary trauma. The professional impact is perhaps experiencing a low performance on job tasks. Your morale on the job just might be low. Your relationships with others are beginning to suffer, or you might just bring an attitude to work every day. Okay, there's just a few more here. And again, I invite you to think about these conditions, think about these impacts, and if they've impacted you, or maybe a colleague or a peer, a loved one, a family member. The cognitive impact, right? The cognitive impact is something where you might experience diminished concentration, diminished confusion, difficulty with decision-making, decreased self-esteem, self-doubt, blaming others. You might have experienced trauma imagery, which is sort of seeing things over and over and over again. So those are the cognitive impacts. The spiritual impact: questioning the meaning of life, right? Your sense of purpose in the world. You've lost that. You're a bit off balance with what that is. Perhaps you lack self-satisfaction. You become angry at a higher power. When ironically, it's usually our spirituality that we go to in times of need, in troubling, traumatic events. And so we kind of look to that spirituality in us to sort of get through that. And that can be disrupted if we're experiencing secondary traumatic stress. And the interpersonal impact, the last one here, again, physically, emotionally unavailable to coworkers, friends. You may have decreased intimacy, decreased interest in intimacy or physical touch. You might isolate yourself from family, friends, avoid others, withdraw from others, or perhaps you become impatient or intolerant around others around you. So it's important, again, to emphasize that this can kind of impact us in different ways. And again, that professional and the personal impact. And so if I'm going to talk about sort of the risk factors and what is secondary trauma and what is the impact, then what can we do about it? Well, the good thing is there are some things to do about it. So if we can go to the next slide. And here we talk about self-care is not enough. And I couldn't agree more with that. I got into this work about a decade or so ago, and I always attached this to self-care and kind of looking at self-care across some of the multiple domains that I just shared with you. But I've been moving away from some of that and really looking at this collective care, right? Really looking at this sort of this holistic wellness that celebrates and honors diversity. There's an approach to cultural humility called ORCA, and it's an acronym that stands for openness, respect, curiosity, and accountability. So are we open to others? Do we invite others' opinions? Are we respectful of other opinions? Are we curious to learn about ourselves and about the individuals that we're working with? And do we hold ourselves accountable? I like that slide that said, what are we going to be accountable for today? And my choice was to be in a place of healing and trauma healing. And so I think we could take that same Orca stance to cultural humility and apply it to this overall holistic wellness. And how are we really interpreting that? And how do we invite ourselves to experience that, to enjoy it, and share and learn from the others that we're working with and that we're working around? Again, I invite you to think about this and to continue to think as we're moving through the remainder of our session today and how this is impacting you and sitting with you in your respective spaces.
Thank you, Steve. As you're sharing your slides and the things that we may experience as a result of secondary traumatic stress, like so many things are just bumbling around in my head, and I am excited for this conversation that we're going to have with these really powerful scholars and practitioners. And so let's dive in, let's get to it. We have Dr. Alan Greene, Candice Valenzuela, and Katrina Traylor Rice here with us today. And I'd like to, before we get into some questions, give them a moment to introduce themselves. So if you could share who you are, come on camera, welcome. And so share your name, your role, and the question we'd like to enter into this conversation with is, what brings you to this work? And yeah, maybe Katrina, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katrina Traylor Rice. I work for Alter Graduate School of Education as their Whole Child Initiative Manager. Excuse me. Shh. I have lots of kids here with me. And I taught for 15 years in secondary schools in urban areas. And what brought me into education is what brings me to this work, thinking about the own trauma and educational experiences I had as a student and the type of environment and experiences I wanted to create for young people, which is really centered around joy and love and resistance, and how we can find joy in the smallest moments, how we can love one another, and how we can then use those positive qualities, those moments that feel good, to resist the moments that don't feel good. Thank you.
Thank you. Candice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Candice. She, her, they, them. I hold a lot of roles, but today I'm standing in my role of trauma-informed schooling consultant. I work with schools throughout California and other parts of the country on a one-on-one basis to support their leaders in implementing trauma-sensitive, trauma-responsive curriculum and programming and schooling within their schools. I'm also an educator who supports pre-service teachers through the University of San Francisco. And what brings me to the work is also my own experience, like you shared, Katrina. Like before I ever was an educator, I was a young Blaxican child in South LA, and that guides my reflection every day around like my own personal trauma and what I needed, what I got, and what I didn't receive from adults around me, and how that's been really an inspiration for the work I did for 10 years in the classroom as a secondary teacher, and then now the work I do supporting new teachers and school sites. And so regardless of what kind of professional accolades I get, it's always that sort of inner child in me that's that young little Blaxican child in me that's guiding my reflection. And I'll popcorn over to Alan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Greene, and I, like my colleagues and fellow panelists here, have a number of hats that I wear in education. I consider myself kind of like an educational nomad, simply because of my experiences, like the two before me who mentioned, Katrina and Candice, who mentioned their own traumatic experiences in education. Not for that as a military brat, sometimes finding myself as being the only Black kid in a school or a class, to being in environments where I was surrounded by those who looked like me, but maybe not necessarily the kinds of experiences that I've had. And so, yeah, the work that I do now, I get a chance to work in everything from K-12, community colleges, four-year schools, graduate schools. And I work with people in all of those settings, and it's really a blessing to do that. And I think that what brings me here today is to talk about this, the work that I do in relationship to the goals of this workshop, and that is understanding how secondary trauma healing, right, and for particularly those who work with Black and Brown and Indigenous and other folks who have been impacted by white erasure. So, you know, it's really exciting opportunity to be here and have this conversation. Thank you. I guess I should popcorn to Steve. I know you've been introduced, but maybe, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, I mean, I have similar stories with each of you, and I imagine a lot of our guests today. And yeah, I have a couple of hats. I'm a clinical professor in social work at USC, but I also do a lot of work around the secondary trauma and compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction, which is kind of new to the literature a couple of decades or so ago. I don't know how new that would be. And then on this piece around wellness and healing and how important that is, and to respect each other's sort of identification with what that means. Like I said, I used to kind of look at this as self-care, and I started to move away from that. It's exhausted shelf life, in my opinion. And I don't think it kind of takes into account the very diverse views of BIPOC educators, youth, others who identify that way. So it's really exciting to be here with you and to learn. We've been prepping this for a while now, and I've been learning from each of my colleagues and friends today. So I'm really happy with what we have for you, and just really great to be here.
Lovely. So we're going to open it up to panel discussion with our first question.
Okay, so the first question is for Candace, and I'm actually going to read this question so I get it correct. So Candace, what are the ways leaders can resource and support BIPOC teachers, and how does this look different than traditional models of teacher support? How is BIPOC teacher support related to equity in schools?
Thank you. Yeah, so I want to start off by acknowledging that every community is different. And as we talked about in the first slides, there is no intention here to flatten the experience of the wide diversity of our teachers in schools. And so I'm going to offer things that come from, you know, the way I coach my principals or the schools I work in my own lived experience as a BIPOC teacher. And then you can see how that applies to you or doesn't. So the first thing that comes to mind is that leaders and schools really take to heart the really special and unique role that BIPOC educators play in schools. When I myself was teaching in secondary, I noticed that it wasn't uncommon that there were certain students who only I could reach. You know, where we're all trying our best, but due to cultural resonances and just so much more, and likely my own trauma history, I was often like more effective in certain ways with sometimes the more challenging students, the students that needed extra love. And that's not something that every single BIPOC educator does, but I see it more often than not. And so there's this unique role where a BIPOC teacher is likely often coming to the community because they share experiences, because they have background, and then they build a different nature of relationship with their students. And my experience both observing and being one is that that role was appreciated when others were benefiting from it. Like, you know, this kid's in the office, it's like, call Candace. I'm not an administrator. I'm being pulled from my English classroom to go talk to a student in crisis, right? And I see this in school after school. But outside of that moment, you know, I'm not being paid extra for that labor. I'm not being acknowledged that I'm carrying an additional emotional labor that other teachers aren't carrying. So I think that one thing leaders can do is really recognize and sit in that there's a different burden being held by teachers of color, potentially. And all teachers have their trauma history that they're bringing to the classroom, but not all teachers are bringing in historical trauma that they share with the community they work in. There's going to be this added layer that the teacher is holding. And often on the other side of that, there's an unspoken expectation that that teacher or person of color is also going to do this extra emotional labor. And so I think before we can kind of change those vulnerabilities of what's causing the secondary trauma for BIPOC teachers, it's also recognizing that the heavier weight they're carrying and being really sensitive to that, and then thinking about, okay, if they're holding a higher trauma load, that the school more often than not, I honestly have never seen a school acknowledge that. What resources are we providing to counter and increase the resilience of these teachers? Like, if we always say we want diversity, right? And we say we want diversity, like get the Black and brown teachers, right? But then when they come, if we haven't changed the system as it stands, it's largely been curated around the needs or the assumption of like white teachers, right? Then how are we going to maintain that diversity? So it's not uncommon that you see teachers of color come, burn themselves out really fast, and then they're out. And then we're losing this historical knowledge from our schools, so or our communities. So I'd say leaders really taking to heart, being mindful in having equity in what teachers are being asked to do, and being aware that whereas some teachers might be holding more administrative tasks, some teachers are holding more emotional labor, and labor around the historical trauma in our communities. How are we resourcing them? I know that's my time for this question, but I want to offer some specific things. Is it okay if I
Please.
offer a couple specific things around what could these resources look like? So the resources can look like additional time, unstructured time, where teachers are able to process or just breathe or just be by themselves. Like most teachers that I talk to, they're like, our agendas, our PEs are overstructured. I can't even catch my breath. So understanding that like time to recover is key to minimizing secondary traumatization. So building in that time of collaboration and support for BIPOC teachers, all teachers, but BIPOC teachers in particular, being mindful of the ask. For example, going back to my example, that principal, if he's asking me to step into the office to manage a student in crisis, I should have a sub for my classroom where I can decompress after that event, because I had to go back from decompressing a student in the office and go back to teaching my class. Now that's sort of an extreme example, but I see it all over. So don't just ask more of our BIPOC teachers. What are we going to give more to them in time, resources, funding, and support? And really, honestly, having those honest conversations with them in really honest ways around, like, what do you feel like you're holding that isn't talked about here? Because if you are a white leader, it's very likely that you may not even be aware of what the teachers are holding. Especially if that racial safety isn't there, they may never tell you. And so having open conversation, like, what is something that you wish the school knew you held that you've never had a chance to talk about, and opening that space and going beyond like teacher surveys around satisfaction, but having one-on-one conversations. And the last thing I'll say before we go to the next person is that one thing I created for some of my schools that's starting to take on in my district is what I called a listening series. And it's a process where one trusted person in the community sits down for 20 minutes with every single person in that community and just listens. And you don't ask, it's not an interview, you're not asking questions, you're just listening to what they want to share. And it's been transformative at all the schools that have done it. Because you're hearing things beyond just your awareness, you're hearing what people's real experiences are and what they want to share. And this kind of listening, and then you get like 20 pages of data, then the leaders have to go home and like cry because it's so intense. and then you get support. And then what has happened, while my leaders have said that's the most difficult thing they've done, it's also been the most transformative, because then they, yeah. So thank you. I'll pass it back to Steve.
Well, maybe we can open the same question up for anyone else that wants to respond to it. And I want to add just a little nuance or a layer to it, because we can't wait for these institutions to protect us. That is something that I've learned. So while this list is like, I would love the day that every school incorporates these practices in this special time. What I'm also wondering, in addition, what are some ways that we as BIPOC educators can protect our own wellness? Because the idea of boundaries has been foreign to me most of my life, and is something that I'm newly becoming accustomed to. And thinking the long list that Steve raised in the opening, I'm just wondering if anyone has something to share in regards to that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there. Just hearing Candace's comments just now just reminded me. I got a call, or like someone called me last night, a colleague of mine, a Latina woman who has a 1-year-old baby, kind of like Katrina there, right? And she's a professor here at the university with me. And she's been struggling with navigating the politics of her department during the pandemic, with the husband who's a physician working on the front lines, and the stress of trying to do all that work, take care of a child, do her job, and the challenges that come with her husband coming home every day and trying to make sure they're all safe, right? And she's calling me for support. And a lot of the pressure that she feels is because she puts her family first. She's not like her white female colleagues, nothing against them, because they're my colleagues too, but who have poured themselves into their work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, always working hard. And she's been very clear about her boundaries, and that's been really harmful for her, because now they feel like she's not pulling her load. And I had to really just honor her for putting her, because we talked about the changes of becoming more culturally appropriate in the program that she's in and trying to do this work better. But I had to honor the fact that she's starting from within by doing the work, and that it needs to start, we need more people like her in that department or that program. So I guess what I'm saying is like being honoring whether it's yourself or your colleagues who are carrying these burdens in this work, right? And that begins with how well you're able to take care of yourself, because these systems are really designed to wear us down, and yet we need to be a part of them to do this work. So I don't know if I'm making sense on that, but it's just like honoring that internal compass that like my colleague is following, and encouraging others to do the same.
Yeah, that's incredibly courageous. I want to pose the question to Katrina now, if possible. And so we're drawing the link. I'd like to ask you to draw the link between teacher wellness and student wellness. And, often, as Candace was sharing, our deep connection to the communities that we're serving as BIPOC educators. What are some of the correlations between student and adult stress level and wellness?
So we all know that energy is contagious, that if I come into class one day and I'm super cranky and I haven't done the work to navigate that, eventually I'm going to have cranky students. If I come into class and I'm really joyful, and eventually, right, that's going to change the energy, particularly as the teacher, because we have so much power over the energy of the classroom. But it's true, there's students who can change the dynamic too. And so that connection is inherent. And one thing I found early in my career was I was taking on so much of the stress of students that I wasn't intentional about making my classroom a space where they can relieve that, a healing centered class, where there was joy, where there was happiness, where they could escape whatever trauma was happening at home that I could not impact. I wish I could take away their trauma. I wish I could swap places with them, right? The way we would with our own children. And I cannot. But what I can do is not hold their trauma so much that now I have nothing to offer them, but make my classroom a space where they can forget about it for a while, where they can find joy, where they can find community. And And that comes in just, a check-in question and making sure we say hi to each other. I think with secondary students, it is really powerful to teach them how to laugh in community without laughing at the expense of somebody else. And that takes a lot of work. And once they learn it, think of all the joy that can happen in a classroom without somebody being, part of the joke. And so kind of creating that space is really powerful. And I had something else I wanted to say. So the way I do that for young people, going back to the other question, is the way I need my leaders to do that for me. And so if we think about the educational system and the white supremacist structures that kind of inform it at every level, there's what's happening in the classroom, there's what's happening in the school building, there's what's happening in the district, there's what's happening in the city, there's what's happening at the state level. And the leaders need to buffer it so that I'm buffering it so my students don't have to feel that impact. And I need my leaders to buffer it for me so that I feel it as little as possible. And if we're all kind of doing that to protect the folks that we're the leaders of, then it creates a space where we can all be more well and do powerful work for our students and communities.
Trina, thank you. And I really resonated with your opening statements about just checking in with students in my classes. I'm at the graduate level, but I do have them do weather reports from time to time. And I use that as a metaphor with describing how they're feeling right at this very moment in time. Are they feeling windy? Are they feeling cold? Are they feeling sunny and bright? And that we sort of have to identify that certain weather means different things. Like, so I'm originally from back east, so I miss a good thunderstorm or rain. So when it rains out here, I like it. That brings me peace and calm and serenity. So I really like your checking in there. The third,
if I kind of chime into
sure,
what
sure.
Katrina was saying in the earlier. Thank you. So Oriana, I wanted to come back to your question because you asked us about like what can BIPOC teachers do for themselves, and like saying, we can't wait for the systems to hold us. So I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit more. Like, I agree with you, but I also view it a little bit differently because I feel like BIPOC educators can experience isolation in a particular way that's really unique to their experience, and almost this way where like you're holding the school, you're holding the students, you're holding community trauma, you're doing all of that, and then when you're struggling, folks are like, you're strong, go take care of yourself, and it can very much like reinforce, I think, negative coping around like shame of like needing help or not being this hero teacher that I think even in social justice communities, there can be a lot of language that we're, saviorism is looked at as negative for white teachers. But what about the way that we can imbibe saviorism as teachers of color? I know I did, and it takes a long time to unpack from that into why I even wanted to be a teacher. So I make it a point, and I say that on purpose, to note the systems change that needs to happen. And even if the larger structure isn't ready to fully change, if you care about diversity in your particular milieu, in your particular community, here are things you can advocate for your teachers. Instead of, we always have this brain drain of teachers of color from the communities, but we're not saying why, right? Or looking at those underlying factors. So it's a push for those of us who are saying we're about equity and we want this to work. How are you advocating in your sites for equity? And going back to the definition of trauma, one way of looking at trauma is that it occurs as a result of a disconnection from community, an alienation from the resources in the community that we need as humans to thrive. And so those of us who study trauma know that in a lot of ways, trauma can only actually truly be healed in relationship, in a healing relationship or in community. So that's why when we're thinking about our BIPOC educators, one, it's like, as leaders, how are you creating that buffer? I love that word, Katrina, because I think about that way too. And then if your particular school is not a place where that can happen, to Oriana's statement, how are we doing the work to create communities of care around us, even if they're not in our exact schools? There's no way I could have taught for 10 years in East Oakland and Richmond if I did not have my community of care. We have our closest loved ones, but sometimes those are the last people that we call at the end of the week. Really making it a point to have nourishing social connection that isn't about the students, that isn't about your role or your saviorism, and building that community of care. You got your homies and maybe y'all get together. Think about, in the ways you get together, how can that be nourishing? How can that be nutritive? Can you also do things that are like really good together? I know some people have like running buddies or meditation buddies, or, you know, holding each other accountable. One of the sweetest things I saw with some of my teachers that I worked with in a healing circle was they created a food share. So as a teacher, like, you know, you're trying to meal prep, you're trying to eat healthy, you end up eating the kids' lunch, you know? So
That's real. That's real.
sorry, I be going on my box, y'all. So then so they would cook food. One person was responsible. They cook a big pot and they'd bring it and they'd share it. So everybody had lunch. So
Wow.
just getting really creative, and I love that you guys are doing that, and creative and practical about how, like, did you eat? Have you drank water? Have you laughed today? You know, I was big on hugs, you know, with consent. If kid's not trying to hug you, go get your 20-second hug from your colleague. You know, that produces oxytocin in the brain. So I think there is a lot that we can do to nourish those things, while also holding that, like, we're not gonna heal trauma individually. It's a societal effort.
Thank you so much. And in that, I hear ways that white allies can step in and hold space and create some of that healing, do some of that work on behalf of BIPOC communities. I think that's a lovely segue into the next question for Alan that Steve is going to.
Yeah, thank you, Oriana. So Alan, the question for you is, what are some cultural strengths within BIPOC communities that can serve to counter the harsh and heavy impact of working within white institutions? What are potential impacts on our wellness when working to support young people that reflect your own community in under-resourced settings?
Wow, it's a loaded one, and I'm glad to sort of try and take a stab at it. I just want to say that I like the connection that was just made, Candace, right, between healing from trauma in a collective way and Steve's point about self-care being like not what we need. We need collective care, and and the other thing about that is really important. Is like, so Steve was one of my students. I had the very fortunate opportunity to guide him, if you will. I don't know, guide you like he was guiding me as well, but just like working with him on this topic of secondary trauma, and for him to talk about learning from like going from self-care to collective care, owning up to growth or opportunities to grow. I think that's a part of it, humility, right? Just being humble and willing to learn and grow. But as far as strengths and that kind of thing, which is not too far off from that, is that, you know, resilience is a dirty word, right? It's a word that really sort of builds up how well can you put up with a horrible system, and you're almost rewarded for it, and that's not what we want to advocate. We want to advocate navigating systems so that we can change them. And one thing I know about the communities that we're talking about, the people within these BIPOC communities, right? One of my commitments to today's session was about beyond labels and focusing on the human beings behind the labels. But there is a lot of, you know, success and triumph over tragedy, over trauma. But there's also even beauty beyond that, right? There's just like some of the things that were just mentioned about food and humor and interaction and just love and creativity. I mean, that's where it's really at, right? And being able to tap into that in ways that are affirming. And it was mentioned earlier, but for me, my mantras are about love and kindness, right? Or trying to be about focusing on love and kindness, both in terms of how I talk to myself, how I interact with others. And so I think the way to really kind of capture the strengths and the cultural assets that we operate on is to understand that this is a journey that we're all on, particularly during a pandemic. that we get a chance to actually grow and learn from our experiences and honor our mistakes and our weaknesses, and learning how to do it in that same collective manner. How do we kind of pull it together? And the simple kind of term that, you know, I've been trying to focus on personally in my own life, but also in what I teach my students and my own children and that kind of thing, is learning how to respond rather than react. I get a chance to work around like elite athletes here at the university, right? And you know, you throw a ball at a person like me who's like, you know, maybe out of shape and kind of not paying attention or whatever. What am I going to do? I'm going to jump and I'm going to be like, right. But an elite athlete, someone who's trained, who knows what they're doing, they don't react, they respond. Okay, and what's the difference? Reacting is that immediate kind of fear, kind of like, oh my God, what's going on? I don't know. Responding is like really like pausing, being prepared, taking a breath, evaluating your values, your priorities, thinking of your resources, including people, and collaborating with them. So when you read something or you see something or you hear a traumatic story of one of your children that you're working with, I encourage us to respond and tap into the cultural strengths and the things that are going on in our communities and the positive, because otherwise we wouldn't be here. We are more than resilient. We are more than just overcoming trauma and bad things. We're actually pretty awesome. And I think just like, but when we react, we tap into that stress zone and we produce those chemicals. Whereas if you just respond and beginning with breath, gratitude, and those things, I think then you're going to tap into a wealth of resources that are all around you.
Thank you so much. I really love how you're elevating the awesomeness, right? And then we as educators really trust the innate wisdom and strength in our young people and see that we are working in partnership alongside them as opposed to pulling them up. We can carry it more gracefully and together. I think it's really powerful.
And Alan, you're still guiding me because I've never heard the react versus respond. And so I was writing some copious notes. Now I'm going to steal it, probably not give you proper citation, and introduce it to my class tomorrow.
Absolutely. Please do. Please do.
We are right on time for fielding some questions from the audience. And Leora is going to come on and support us in opening the conversation up a little wider.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Candace and Steve and Alan, Katrina, Oriana. You know, we're winding into questions. So I welcome questions coming in chat and coming in Q&A. I got some directly to me. The folks on the line right now, the almost 100 of us, are working explicitly in school mental health systems. We've been talking a lot about teachers and educators, which are also school mental health professionals. So I'm just curious if we can talk a little bit about school mental health and what your call in or your ask in this conversation might be for those of us who are working as school counselors, psychologists, etc.
Yeah. So I'm a school counselor by training and by heart, and also a therapist by training. I don't practice nowadays, but I get the fortune to work in those spaces. And, you know, I saw someone on here today from Baltimore, and I used to work out in that area, in Stockton, California, where I went to college, in Sacramento. So there's like so many places and spaces that are represented just on this call alone. I just have some really fond memories of doing this work around school-based mental health. And you know, the thing that always intrigued me when I was, particularly like when I was in the East Baltimore set network of schools with Johns Hopkins out there, and is looking at like how well the work that we do with regards to mental health aligns with what's going on in the classroom with the students. And that it was not like and I use this for intentionally, we don't fix Johnny so he could do math, right? We work to heal so that the math experience can be as healing as the therapeutic experience. So figuring out how to make alignments between the learning and the healing. And for me as a teacher and a trained clinician, is healing is synonymous with learning. And so I would say that to start there is to really align the mission of healing with the mission of learning, all for the purpose of not a test score, not getting into college, or all those things are important, of course, but for growth and betterment. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate that. I know that there are many folks on this panel that have worked in college and career, have worked in teacher education, also with mental health, and it can actually be incredibly stressful to be navigating those silos and not seeing the integration. So I appreciate you naming that. You know, I think I'd like to bring up a little bit of a spicy question. I know that y'all can navigate it, which is how do we hear the conversation about the potential and reality of secondary traumatic stress with educators that identify as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and not jump to stigmatizing and not jump to assuming that just because you identify as Black or just because you identify as Indigenous, you most likely have secondary traumatic stress. And so I'd like if we bring in that strength-based value, I'd like us to kind of sit with that question a little bit.
I'll just say that was what I was trying to say, that when I was fumbling through resilience, like resilience is great, but we're more than that. And we're more than those stories. We're actually, that's just a part of us in terms of having to navigate those things and sort of survive, but we do more thriving than surviving. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and for me, I don't think we distinguish who it's going to impact more or less. It's a condition that everyone can experience. But when you do add some of the stressors around racial and social injustice and that piece about countertransference and seeing yourself in individuals, BIPOC individuals, youth that you're working with in your schools, that can greatly enhance your risk for, experiencing secondary trauma, which all more reason why, and I love all the comments that we've made about this collective care and community care and relying on our support systems. And Candace said your homies, and I just, that's what we're talking about. And having that ability to do that, I think is really special and unique. So I'm glad you're posing the question, Leora.
I would like to also respond. I think I have a little bit of an unpopular opinion on this, and I think you know that, Leora. I just, I'm not really feeling the current moment that people want to pull away from the terms trauma or resilience. I understand where it's coming from. But for me, it goes back to what are we understanding as trauma and as resilience? And we start off with a land acknowledgement. And for me, that says we're starting off by acknowledging that what brings us all to this land is a historical trauma. We're on this land because of a historical trauma that has occurred. For many of your students of color, most likely they are there through some journey of migration or trauma that brought them into your classroom. I'm not saying they're all traumatized in a deficit model, but I think we need to, honestly, I don't think we need to drop the terms. I think we need to have a better understanding of what they mean. And trauma is a natural human phenomena that protects our bodies, that actually keeps us alive and allows us to sustain. Resilience is inherent. It is a part of who we are. And if we were not resilient, we wouldn't be here. But it's not unlimited, just like we're learning as a society that the earth does not have infinite resources. Our body does not have infinite resources. And so we need to be attuned to our limitations and boundaries. And for me, it's just I push a paradigm shift with my schools around what if being resilient doesn't mean that you can take on more? What if being resilient means that you get to rest because of what you have already done and experienced? And just unpacking, I think, a lot of our, quite honestly, addiction to capitalism and the way that it's seeded us with this notions of like productivity and what it means to be successful. There's just a lot of unlearning that I believe we need to do to, in my opinion, get to a more culturally rooted way of thinking about trauma and healing. And I want to introduce this term called post-traumatic growth. So if you have a traumatic experience, yes, secondary trauma can be an outcome of that. And beyond that, there is all this, so this concept of post-traumatic growth. And I say that as a childhood survivor of severe trauma and abuse, in addition to historical trauma on this land, in addition to going into our schools and receiving more of that and continuing to experience racial aggression and gender-based oppression right now in my current life as a professional. And so I see myself as I am here and able to offer what I offer because of my post-traumatic growth. So I sometimes wonder, how do we like push back against the stigma of even seeing ourselves as traumatized? I love this quote by Aurora Levins Morales, and I'll leave it there. She's a disability justice activist, and she says that naming ourselves as traumatized is, in her opinion, it's humanizing. It says that oppression has an impact, right? She describes trauma as the impact of oppression. So when oppression happens, it's not just those systems out there. There's a lived impact on bodies, on minds, on spirits. And so acknowledging that, to humanize ourselves, that we are we're precious and we're sacred. That's the pathology, I think, comes from the capitalism that's like, oh, if you're wounded, then you know, that's whack. Like, we need to fill that up with compassion and love and space.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you. I'm gonna take a breath with that one. Thank you. So you're getting some resonance in the chat of naming post-traumatic growth. I asked Livia to put in the chat box our other sister project, the School Crisis Recovery and Renewal, because we did a session and we'll continue to do sessions on post-traumatic growth. So thank you so much. We're gonna move into closing, but before we do that, just wanted to do a quick go around with a 1 or 2 words of what you'd like to offer the listeners in this invisible room that you would like to offer as we close. So it can be feeling, it can be support, it can be 2 words, a term to think about, 1 or 2 words that you'd like to offer folks to think about as we move into closing. And we'll go Alan, Candace, Katrina, Oriana, Steve. I think I did that alphabetically. Okay. Alan, Candace, Katrina, Oriana, Steve.
2 words?
Yeah, whatever you want to offer.
Yeah, I got 3. It's like breath and self-love.
Go for it, Katrina. Thank you.
I think it was Candace, if we're going to alphabetical order. So here we go. Mine would be joy, as I mentioned, that everything, if we come back to that, and humanization.
Thank you. Candace.
Echoing what I shared earlier around just, collective care, thinking about what that means in your community and your location, in your life, in your home, and post-traumatic growth. What resources do you need to support that for yourself and the people that you work with?
Thank you. Oriana and then Steve.
Radical, honest, authentic conversation. More words than I'm supposed to, but like this conversation right here needs to happen more and wider and in every space that exists in the world.
I'm going to go with honor the vulnerability.
Beautiful. We are so grateful for all of you to be learning in public and to be our teachers. I'm going to offer folks in the chat box to offer their acknowledgement to all of you, and then welcome Candace, Katrina, and Alan and Steve to go off video as we close out. And so we're going to move into closing. So here we go. And I wanted to invite folks in the learning space. Thank you for all of, and remind you to please put your comments to panelists and attendees so that the room can feel the acknowledgement and the resonance. And so the invitation as we move into closing is to think about, after today's session, what is one walk away After you close down the Zoom, what is one walk away? And some of you are holding on to those words, some of you are holding on to new terminology. And then for those of us that are continuing to commit to this conversation, what might you need in order to continue your learning? Do you need to do more? Do you need to do more reading? Do you need to do more practice, more skill practice, more listening? So what after today's session, what is one walk away? And what might you need in order to continue your experiences? So really welcome you to offer those also into the chat box. Appreciate your affirmation for being willing and honest. And I do just want to name, to be a panelist on a Zoom webinar is an incredibly bizarre thing because you can't see anyone and you're offering sometimes what are things that you may not offer out into the YouTube world. So I just want to recognize that it takes great courage and grace and vulnerability to be offering what our colleagues did today. Okay, thank you. Thank you for offering self-reflection and mindfulness. It could even be Oriana's meta that she introduced us to, of loving on someone who is hard for us to love, loving on someone who we want to love, and bringing in all of our students that we work for together. I'm going to read out one of those beautiful walkway questions. What if trauma resilience meant more calming experiences and not taking or dealing with more? Lovely. Thank you. Okay. So I want to talk about, we just mentioned some, how might you continue your learning? So I wanted to mention more opportunities to extend. So the first is that we, as this whole series was happening for Interconnected Systems Framework, we, in resonance with Susan and Barrett and many other faculty, we believe that this work happens on the individual, happens in affinity, happens across difference, but just like collective healing happens, of course, in collective, so does collective learning. So really encourage you to find a colleague that you know might have been on, and then discuss what resonated, what needed more inquiry, and how might further technical assistance support you. At the very bottom there, I know Candace, some of our colleagues are dropping their Instagram, and they're just saying how to find them. I also want to mention that Steve comes to us through the Treatment and Services Adaptation Center, Trauma Aware Schools, and they have been one of our colleagues along with Susan Barrett in this entire ISF series. Thank you. And then a couple other learning opportunities, friends. So if you are part of the MHTTC network, which you are because you're here, you are very much invited to join all of us in this Always and Now School Mental Health Guide Curriculum Inquiry Series. So there are 8 modules. There are eight parts of the series. The next one is the second week of March. Livia will help us. The second week of March, and the theme is on needs assessments. So we just did teaming this week, then we'll meet in 2 weeks and talk about needs assessments. So we do national conversation around the guide, and then we do small regional breakouts. And it's a really great opportunity to meet people in your region and to get thought partnership. This, colleagues, I just have to say, the first session was this morning. If you want to put in the chat, if you were with us in this morning, we've had a big day of webinars. But this, my friends and colleagues, was one of the most impactful experiences as a listener that I've had in a long time, that Oriana has organized along with many colleagues across the MHTTC network, called Healing School Communities in the Context of Racial Violence. Yes, Cassandra, this morning was amazing. And the idea is, where do we go from here? So we gathered in the middle of last summer to talk about how to support school mental health in the context of racial violence. And we know just because that Black lives still matter, that Black minds still matter, that our students still matter, and we need to continue the work and continue the conversations to hold ourselves accountable. So we hope that you join us for part 2 next March 4th. At 11 a.m. Pacific time, which is whatever time it is for you, wherever you are. They will be recorded, so you'll get to get them on the page, on the website page. Okay, and last but not least, we're very excited. The Northwest and the Pacific Southwest are going to be hosting an Interconnected Systems Framework West Coast District Leadership Institute. Region 9, Region 10. So that is for anyone who participated in this entire series, October through February, to come to us with us sometime in June to learn as a district team about both systems and services work together. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, all of our webinars are recorded. Livia has been dropping the site page so you can get to know the whole series. That is an acronym page that is up on the deck so you can follow. If you heard acronyms, please follow us, contact us, let us know how this resonated, how it didn't resonate, feedback. Our cousins up north, northwest, you can access their newsletters, which are always incredibly full of resources. And then you'll get a survey at the end. Please let us know how this landed for you. We actually do read them. We get the data and we read them and we learn from them. And then we get to also send them to our faculty so that they get to learn cycle of feedback. Okay, so as of today, that is it. We finished all of our modules. You can check out every single recording, all the resources. I do want to just note that if you had registered for when this session was originally going to be in January 12th, we postponed it, but we sent out a huge resource list. And so that resource list that can help guide your learning on the potential connection between secondary traumatic stress, Black, Indigenous, people of color, educators, resilience, healing, etc., is on the event page. So Livia, if you could help put that event page back on, or it's right on the screen, and the link to all the recordings is also on that page. Okay, that is it, my friends. I welcome you to drink a lot of water after today. I want to thank a huge bucket of gratitude to Candace, to Steve, to Alan, to Katrina, to Oriana, our colleague here, for helping organize today's session, our colleagues Kelsey and Megan at Northwest MHGTC, and all of you for joining us and listening in. We hope to be able to be learning with you soon, maybe even in person one day, and wish you lots of wellness, vibrant wellness, and we'll see you soon. Take care.